Remember, this video is educational purposes only.
Hello people, how's it going? It's been a while since our last video. If there's anyone haven't watched the previous videos, you can watch them before watching this one. Today we'll learn some manipulation techniques, and as well as how they works. I'll start with some common and popular techniques. Before I start, I would like to say I appreciate all of your posts in our Facebook group and also the participation on the Discord server. Let's get back to the video. Alright, the very first technique is called reverse psychology. This technique consists in assuming a behavior opposite to the desired one, with the expectation that this prohibition will arouse curiosity and therefore induce the person to do what is really desired. For instance, when you tell a child not to do something, that is the first thing they do. This type of response persists throughout a person's life. It's a way of getting things done, giving the opposite of the command you want to give. If I say things like, "Don't be offended," "Don't worry," I get the opposite effect. I will make my interlocutor stiffen. Some people are known to be like boomerangs because they refuse to go in the direction they are sent, but take the opposite route. This type of behavior can be used by a dark persuader because it's a weakness that the victim has. Take an example of a friend who loves to eat junk food at any opportunity they get. The dark persuader knows this and therefore will suggest that they should eat healthy because it will be good for them, knowing that the friend will choose fast food anyway. When individuals are told that they should not believe one thing or the other, they will pay closer attention to it. Imagine your friend doesn't want to try a new food. Instead of pushing them, you say, "It's fine if you don't want to. It's probably not for everyone, and you might not even like it." Suddenly, they're more likely to say, "Hey, I can handle it. I'll give it a try." Reverse psychology works wonders with a little nudge like that. Technique number 2. Blackmailing. Blackmail is commonly known as having some type of information or knowledge that, if revealed, can be very damaging to the victim. Therefore, the victim doesn't have much choice but to comply with the manipulator. The end result is a negative feedback loop in which the victim has no choice but to go along until they have a chance to escape the trap. Blackmail is one of the first tools a manipulator would use. Blackmail is commonly seen on TV and in the movies. Manipulators use personal or sensitive information about a person to extort them. The result of extorting an individual is the gain of some kind of benefit from that person. In the movies, you commonly see manipulators threatening to reveal damaging personal information about a person unless they comply with their wishes. This is a form of coercion and doesn't necessarily need to be accompanied by threats of physical violence. If the victim is weak enough, they will cave and comply with the manipulator's requests. However, if the victim decides to confront the manipulator, they may face the consequences of the information being revealed about them. It should be noted that extortion is generally a threat of physical harm unless victims comply with the demands of the aggressor. Typical extortion does not involve any kind of personal information. Rather, it seeks to use physical violence to compel others to act in accordance with the manipulator's desires. This generally includes some kind of payment in exchange for protection. The victims usually have one of two options: either face the extortionist and fight them, or run away. Generally, the latter is the best course of action. In the workplace, blackmail can be an incredibly damaging tool. However, it is not to be used often as blackmail uncovers the identity of the manipulator. While there may be anonymous blackmail threats, generally speaking, a manipulator will have to reveal their true identity in order for the victim to see them as a credible threat. Once the cat is out of the bag, the manipulator will have to eventually move on to another victim once they have exhausted their current one. Next up, we've playing the victim role and playing the servant role. Now let me tell you, when manipulators play the role of the victim, in actual sense, they never really see themselves as victims. It's just a game for them, and the point is to avoid responsibility while getting the benefits that come with sympathy. They want to be perceived as weak people who are suffering, emotionally wounded, or even physically injured for the purposes of eliciting sympathy or managing impressions. Manipulators try to convince their victims that they are the ones who are suffering in one way or another. If the victim is invested in the manipulator's welfare, she may decide to offer help, often at a high personal cost. You should be extremely cautious if you realize that you are dealing with a person who likes to play the victim, because you never know how far they may go. If someone plays the victim in any dynamic, someone else has to be cast as a victimizer, and if the manipulator is good at it, she could come up with a very well-constructed narrative that could irreversibly ruin your reputation or even put you in legal jeopardy. If someone you are dating plays the victim when the two of you are together, it might be possible to deal with the issue by seeking counseling. However, if you notice that she is selling that narrative to other people, you should try to get out of that relationship as fast as possible before the lie escalates and everyone turns against you. Playing the servant role refers to a manipulative trait where a person pretends to be doing something for a noble cause or to serve someone else when they are actually cloaking a self-serving agenda. This is common in Machiavellians and psychopaths, but not so much in narcissists. A Machiavellian may pretend to be on your side, and he may offer to do your bidding. He may even give you plenty of reasons to trust him, and you may let him in and give him access to your resources. Sooner or later, he will reveal his true intentions. Oftentimes, it could be that he has a desire for power or control, and to him, you are just in the way. Machiavellians are good at hiding their ambitions, but when the opportunity arises, they'll strike, and they'll exert their dominance over you. There are manipulators who get into leadership positions by playing the servant role. They then go on to use those leadership positions for personal enrichment, or for their own agendas. You may have heard of people who start charities and prey on conscientious and well-meaning people to collect donations, which they proceed to embezzle. Our next manipulation technique, called the door in the face. When we want to obtain a certain result from our interlocutor, we should make a request that we consider too high and unreasonable. This request will undoubtedly be followed by a metaphorical door in the face, that is a refusal. At this point, we should immediately follow the real request that we had in mind. Compared with the first, in fact, the new request will appear more modest and reasonable. This technique bases its effectiveness on the natural tendency of our mind to make comparisons. If we provide the right term of comparison, no request will appear excessive. This technique works because it arouses in the person a sense of guilt and an idea of concession. In other words, your renunciation will be perceived as a concession, and then it is a sneaky application of the reciprocity rule. Another similar technique is called foot in the door. This tactic is implemented in increments. This begins with the manipulator asking for small favors. Every time the victim complies, the manipulator will ask for increasingly bigger favors until they get what they ultimately want, or they exhaust their victim. At that point, the manipulator needs to move on to a fresh victim. Let's say you need help moving furniture all weekend, but you know it's a big ask. So, you start small. You ask your friend, "Hey, could you help me move just one couch? It'll only take a few minutes." Once they agree and show up, you say, "While you're here, mind helping with a couple more things?" Since they've already agreed to the small favor, they're much more likely to go along with the bigger request. By the way, if any of you don't understand these techniques, you can always ask in the comment, or you can ask in our Dark Psychology Facebook group. Alright, have you people heard about reinforcement? We've this positive and negative reinforcement. Let's start with positive reinforcement. We always think of positive reinforcement as a good thing, but malicious people can also use it to manipulate their victims. The fact is that we all use positive reinforcement in one form or another. Parents use it to get their kids to behave properly. Teachers use it to make their students more interested in school. Bosses use it to encourage productivity. and partners use it to modify each other's behavior in relationships. It is an integral part of our social interactions, but it only becomes a problem when it's detrimental of the person it's being used on. Positive reinforcement happens when a good or desirable stimulus is presented in such a way that it appears to be a consequence of certain behavior. For example, a child who eats his vegetables gets a scoop of ice cream at the end of the meal, and it registers in his mind that those two things are intricately linked. An employee who works hard and becomes more productive gets a bonus at the end of the month, and her brain makes the connection between the hard work and the extra disposable income. The next time the person has to perform the same activity, she will recall the positive feeling or the reward from earlier, and will take a course of action that ensures she gets a similar outcome. When manipulators use positive reinforcements, they are always trying to get you to do things that benefit them. For example, an abusive person in a relationship may buy you a gift after a major abusive incident in order to keep you from leaving or reporting him. You may have heard of people who hit their spouses and then buy them flowers the next day. In such cases, the abuser is trying to get you to accept the abuse as a norm that comes with a reward. The message here is that if you shut up, you get something nice. Positive reinforcement is also used by manipulators who want you to be their accomplice when they are taking advantage of a third party. Machiavellians are particularly good at using this technique. For example, a boss who embezzles from work may offer you a payoff to keep his secret. Manipulators often use positive reinforcement on an incremental basis when they want you to do something against your will. The objective here is to lull you into complacency. They know that once you have accepted a basic level of positive reinforcement, they can escalate things and push you outside of your comfort zone. The simplest and most commonly used form of positive reinforcement is a commendation. When someone goes out of their way to compliment you in public, they could be using positive reinforcement to manipulate you. For instance, when you are with a group of friends and one of them starts saying, "What a nice guy you are," how much they know they can rely on you, the chances are that he is buttering you up to ask you for a favor. Next, the negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is a form of psychological manipulation, which is used to make people feel obligated to act in certain ways in order to avoid certain levels of mental or physical pain or discomfort. In positive reinforcement, you get a reward for acting the way the manipulator wants you to act, and the desire for that reward is what modifies your behavior in the future. Negative reinforcement is, however, a bit more complicated than that. To understand the concept of negative reinforcement, you first have to understand how it's different from punishment. Both of them are popular manipulation techniques, but there is a subtle difference between them. Many people assume that they are the same thing, but they are not. In punishment, the manipulator adds something negative when you don't act a certain way. In negative reinforcement, the manipulator subtracts something negative when you act the way they want you to act. Reinforcement is meant to strengthen voluntary responses, while punishment is meant to weaken voluntary responses. The manipulator will choose one method or the other based on the kind of outcome that they desire in that particular situation. While punishment is meant to stop a certain behavior from occurring again, reinforcement is meant to encourage the behavior to occur again. A manipulator would use punishment to stop you from doing something he doesn't want you to do. However, he will use negative reinforcement to force you to do, or to keep doing, something he wants. For example, nagging is more of a negative reinforcement technique than a punishment. When someone wants you to do something, they keep nagging you to do it, and the nagging stops when you comply. So negative reinforcement works on you because you want to put a stop to a negative stimulus that already exists, while punishment works because you want to keep something negative from happening. Every time someone does something negative to twist your arm to get you to take a certain course of action, that is negative reinforcement. When you are trying to break up with someone, and she cries very loudly about it in a public place. Until you change your mind, they are using negative reinforcement to manipulate you. Sanctions are also a very common form of negative reinforcement. They are used by powerful nations to get other nations to bend to their will, but they can also be used in interpersonal relationships or at work in one form or another. A sanction is basically a threat of a future consequence if you fail to do something. Sanctions may be used in relationships for the common good or for malicious intentions. You have to assess the individual situation to tell if the use of sanctioning or any other negative reinforcement technique is malicious. Have you heard about silent treatment? Here's an example of using the silent treatment strategically. Imagine you've asked a friend for help on something important, but they brush it off or seem uninterested. Instead of pushing further, you go quiet and withdraw a bit. No texts, no calls, just silence. The absence of communication makes them notice and wonder if something's wrong. Most often, this triggers them to reach out, asking if everything's okay or even offering to help, now that they're feeling the effects of the silence. The key here is subtlety. Keeping the silence calm, not angry, so they naturally feel drawn to reconnect. As social beings, we need the approval and the affection of others to thrive. Even people who are introverted need to have some sort of back and forth with the people in their lives to feel whole. When someone gives you the silent treatment, they deny you that affection, and it can mess with you psychologically and force you to make certain concessions that you aren't ready to make. So, a manipulator will ask you to do something, and when you say no, she will start ignoring you. They won't respond when you talk to them, and they won't answer your calls or texts. Some of them may even suddenly vanish from your life or go out of their way to avoid being in the same room with you. The more emotionally involved you are, the higher the chances you will decide that the animosity isn't worth you standing your ground, and you will find yourself doing what they want. The silent treatment is one of those bad habits that tend to escalate with time in a relationship. If someone uses this technique against you once and it works, they'll start using it at every turn. Technique number 8 or 7. I forgot. Anyways, next up we've isolation. Well, we all have social support systems that help us cope with difficult situations and keep us from making decisions that are bad for us. We have friends and family members who take notice when our behavior changes or when we start hanging out with bad people, and they always watch our backs. Manipulators understand this, and one of the first things that they'll do when trying to gain control over your life is to isolate you. Isolation facilitates abuse, because it takes away any recourse that you might have when someone starts getting abusive. It closes a victim's avenues of escape, and it increases their sense of helplessness. It ensures that when things go south, there's no one there to rescue you. It increases the power that the abuser or manipulator has over the victim, because it makes the victim more dependent on the abuser. Once an abuser has managed to isolate you, he will take his abuse to the next level, because he knows you have no one to turn to. In fact, other manipulation techniques such as gaslighting work even more effectively when a person is isolated. They say that love is blind, and sometimes at the beginning of relationships, we are blind to the dark traits of the people we are dating. Some manipulators may try to isolate you from the very first time you meet them. If you start dating someone and you notice that he never wants to hang out at your place, or he never wants you to bring your friends along on casual dates, chances are he is trying to isolate you so that you cannot get your friends to give you an objective assessment of his character. I understand you people want some more advanced techniques. Well, I'll definitely share them. But in this video, we are just learning some common and easy to understand type methods. Alright, so the next one is financial obligations. Often sects and cults create economic dependence in the followers or induce the donation of property, both real estate and money. Let's see what happens in some co-ops. First phase. It is accepted by all employees to receive salaries late. 2 months become 3, 4, sometimes 5, and touch peaks of 6 months. Those who just can't make a living ask the leader for advance payments that are weighed as personal favors, for which you are in debt, and must show gratitude. Second phase. Employees no longer receive salaries and are told that there is no money, so they have to embrace a new ideology. The ideology of financial obligations provides that employees must give up wages that have not yet been collected in order to acquire the new status of working partner. This status gets at least 6 months' salary and is sold as a business opportunity. The new ideology becomes the object of group thinking, and those who do not adapt are isolated. Isolation weakens the victim and makes them more vulnerable to mental attacks. For today, our last technique is a blackmailing one, but it's moreover emotionally. I present you emotional blackmail. While blackmail is very common as far as holding damning information on someone, emotional blackmail can be just as damaging. This occurs when the manipulator has some type of control over the victim, and then uses this control to extort the victim. When the manipulator is able to recognize that the victim is in a vulnerable position, they are able to use that against them. So it's important that you recognize if you happen to find yourself in such a position. That way you can guard against unwelcome attempts. The manipulator may try to inspire empathy and remorse for themselves as a part of this strategy. Both of these feelings are the most effective people can feel, and often enough to motivate the victim to behave in the manner the manipulator needs. The manipulator will use this to get what they want. They will make use of the empathy and remorse that they generate to others to go along with or support them. Using this form of manipulation is about relying more on the subject's emotions rather than their logic. The object constantly faces a risk, primarily in the form of emotional pain and suffering. The manipulator may resort to any maneuvers to trigger feelings powerful enough to compel their target to follow suit. And yeah, that is all for today. I believe you found this video helpful. Again, in the group we discuss a lot of things related to dark psychology. You need help? Don't forget to join and ask me straightway. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.